All right. Hey there, and welcome back to Brainy Book Nerd. Today, I figured we could talk about some adult nonfiction. So, a little bit of a mix of things today. I've got about 5 books sitting here next to me that I figured we could discuss since we did talk about kids' books, quite a few. So, let's change it up a bit. So, these are just 5 of the most recent adult nonfiction that I have read that I figured we could talk about today because it is very widespread on these topics. And I found them rather interesting on how they handled different situations. So, one of the first ones I don't think will come as any surprise to a lot of people, but I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This book, when it came out, really shook people. And I think part of it is obviously, the cover art, because she's literally holding a pink urn that we can just kind of assume that might be her mother's urn. And the fact that she's glad that her mom is dead. I think that a lot of people get very taken aback with such a connotation or a message like that, especially when you consider the quotes on the front from people who read it are impressively funny, is the quote from Jared Carmichael, and an important cultural document by Lena Dunham. This was published by Simon and Schuster, but this book is far more reaching than most people realize. And I think that it touched on so many topics that so many people don't want to touch nowadays, that people are scared to talk about. And Jeanette handled these topics so well. And it's one of the most emotional books that are written in an unemotional manner. And what I mean by that is that she's talking about, massive trigger warning here, but she's talking a lot about eating disorders. So in most of this book, she is discussing her eating disorder and the fact that her mother encouraged her eating disorder, pretty much taught her how to do it. And it's intriguing because she was also used as the cash cow for her family. So, but the way that she writes in this memoir is so intriguing because she really takes the emotion out of a lot of situations. And I think that it's interesting because if you have a traumatic past and you've ever caught yourself in a social situation where you're talking about something that happened in your life and suddenly people look at you like you're crazy and going, that's not normal. This is exactly how this book reads because she doesn't have emotion about, I'm sure there are emotions. She's talked to therapists for years, right? But it's interesting to hear the tone come through when it matches your own tone when you talk about traumatic events that you didn't necessarily correlate to the fact that they were more serious than you originally thought. There's eating disorder stuff just throughout this book, but I'm so glad that she brought it up and I'm so glad that she was willing to talk about it, especially in the manner that she talks about it, just about how it was just kind of conditioned into her. And I know that, everybody who's ever had an eating disorder, anybody who has one currently, there's different reasons for them. And there's different triggers that cause them. And there's different ways, that people try to move past them. And I think that it's refreshing to have someone just be so open about their eating disorder. And one of the things too that I was even considering, people try to say, oh, it's, disordered eating. It's really not. Let's look at the semantics there. Disordered eating. That sounds like you ordered dessert for breakfast and that you're having pancakes for dinner and that somehow is wrong, right? Because they're out of order in the traditional sense. That's not what we're talking about here. That's not a serious situation. February 1st is National Eat Ice Cream for Breakfast Day. That is not an eating disorder. That is disordered eating, if you want to call it that, just because you had ice cream for breakfast. It's out of the normal order of things. But that doesn't have the implication that an eating disorder does, because there's so much more behind eating disorders. And I wish that they got more respect and screen time than most people are willing to give them. So I could probably go on an entire farther tangent from that. But on the other side of that, we have a book called Spark: The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. This is written by John J. Rady with Eric Hagerman. And this book was really interesting, especially if you have ADHD or have a kid with ADHD. This is a really great book to pick up and read. And if you can read nothing else, at least read the first chapter. It's a great introduction to the concepts that are introduced throughout the book. But it really goes into depth about the ties between physical activity and how the brain functions and how the body responds to physical activity, how it benefits from physical activity. Having an issue with talking today. But it's really interesting. And it even, on the cover, it also says, supercharge your mental circuits to beat stress, sharpen your thinking, lift your mood, boost your memory, and much more. So, after I read this, now I personally go to the gym at least 4 times a week. And I usually focus on lifting weights. And I've been lifting for a long time. I was certified personal trainer and boot camp instructor for 6 years. I am very passionate about exercise. But really seeing the results it had with people with ADHD, and, my kid deals with a lot of issues with that. So getting my kid into doing that and having my kid also read the book. I didn't have my kid read the whole thing, but I think that it is really important that we introduce concepts like this to people who are younger. I think it would really help them feel more in control and at least informed about what's going on in their heads, in their hearts, in their lives, and allowing them to feel in better control of things and know that they have advocates who are there to help them along the way. Because if they feel like they're just isolated, that's where we run into a lot of negative situations. So a book like this can actually really help someone feel more in control of what's going on. So yeah, I definitely suggest that. Again, like what I've mentioned in other videos about, getting a physical copy and writing in the book. That is what I have done with all of these. Just because I feel like it's important for you to connect with the book as you're reading it. So when it comes to nonfiction, I always make sure to get a physical copy of a book, so that I can annotate and mark things and question things and reference back, as well. So yeah, definitely get a copy of that. Third up, we have The Body Keeps the Score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And this was written by Bessel van der Kolk. Okay, so this one is a bit of a controversy. This one I have mixed feelings about. One, I'm not a fan of the cover. Let's start with superficial information. I don't like the cover at all. I don't feel connected to the cover. It's so old style. I think it's like Matisse art style, which just it's never been attractive to me. But I digress. This was actually a really rough read. And here's the thing. This book was not written for the people who have suffered trauma in their life. Let me repeat that. The Body Keeps the Score was not written for the people who have suffered trauma. It's written for the doctors. It's written for the people who help the people who have the trauma. Now, I know that we all have trauma to different extents in our lives, but this book was not written for us. Okay, this was written for the people who are there to help us figure it out and move forward. Because reading this book is extremely triggering. And it doesn't matter what kind of trauma you have had, this book is extremely triggering. it, in a way, as you read, you end up reliving that trauma constantly because it's reminding you of that trauma constantly. It's telling you about how the brain functions and how the body responds to the stress and trauma that we've put it through. It has pictures of brain scans and everything. It really is for the people who help us, because these are very difficult concepts to constantly relive. And ironically, I just opened to the page called Dissociation and Reliving. But it's very, very triggering. It talks about veterans. It talks about, young people who had to deal with sexual abuse. And again, a lot of these things are considered taboo. And the hard part about so many topics being considered taboo is that it doesn't allow the conversations to happen for the people who need to be able to talk about it. So when we're talking about eating disorders, when we're talking about sexual assault or, child abuse or anything like that, it's really important that people feel that they can come forward and say something, because otherwise it all stays inside. And then that's how we end up with more issues along the way, is because we weren't allowed to deal with those things. We weren't allowed to express anything. We weren't allowed to process the information through our body or our minds. So this thing, though, this book is definitely not for you if you are dealing with massive amounts of trauma in your past. It is meant for those who need to understand how trauma functions, so that they can then help the people who have been through it. Do not, this is going to sound like a really scathing review, but do not pick this up. Do not read The Body Keeps a Score if you are personally dealing with a lot of trauma. It's really, really going to be triggering for you, and you're going to be reliving your trauma constantly. I actually had to stop reading it about halfway because it was causing more depressive episodes and just constantly going through the memories of all the trauma. So pick up something that's going to teach you how to handle your stress and your trauma, and how to move forward, and how to change your focus to positive things. Because if you do need help in that area of dealing with trauma, you need to find resources that can actually help you move forward, not to relive your past. All right, so the last two are actually written by the same author, and I mentioned these in another episode, but these two books are by Jen Sincero, and the first one is You Are a Badass: How to Stop Doubting Your Greatness and Start Living an Awesome Life. And the second book is You Are a Badass at Making Money: Master the Mindset of Wealth. So the first one is yellow in color, and you've probably heard of it. You've probably seen it floating around, but it's a nice, refreshing take. And it's an all around like personal development book, because apparently people don't say self-help anymore. Again, it's taboo. Why is everybody so stinking scared to say self-help? It's cool to help yourself, right? It's cool to get therapy and like go through these things. So You Are a Badass, just again, it's not really going to tell you anything that you don't know, but it's very nice to have these reminders. It's good to go through. And she even kind of mentions it in the book. Get a physical copy, go through, annotate, mark the pages. What matters most to you? What stands out to you? What do you need to be reminded of the most? Really get involved. One of the other things I really appreciate about this book, if you hear it in the background, is because like I said, have physical copy. I'm flipping through the pages. There are a lot of exercises listed in this book, and actually in both, which I really liked. And so part of me wants to go through and make sure to do the exercises and take out a notebook and answer the questions to really break down how you relate to the different subjects and the different topics. But like I said, my number one thing is that she gets too casual. So what I mean by too casual, let me see if I can find some of these. I think I made sure not to mark up a lot of things that had that kind of language, because it's just so frustrating that some of them were, my husband's in the background. Uh, so in the kitchen, which means he's making a lot of noise. So a lot of these things are great reminders and great topics. The hard part is when she uses extreme casual language. Even at one point in one of the books, she says noise. And I'm like, I get it, but no. Just because in a way and like I said, I totally get it, but it's frustrating to me because this is supposed to be a very professional book. And I wanted to take it like that. Even though you can have casual takes on things, I still want it to be a serious book, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot of stuff in here where I wanted to mark it because it's a great phrase, but then there would be a really casual, random word in there that just didn't make sense. And that was frustrating. She talks about ho-hummery here, and then a little woe is meism. I mean, is there any other way we could have described that? There's, and of course you're a badass. So obviously, we're willing to use more casual language in that, but we do have, I experienced the absolute darkest darkness of beyond pitch black, holy fucking shit, deepest darkness, blackest ever. That's on page 167. So, that it's that kind of thing where I'm like, was there no other way we could explain that? Because some of these things I want to relate and it's frustrating. So that, but I also, and it was interesting though to get all of the different information, to be reminded of stuff. And because they're not large either, you can carry these around with you. Most people have seen these books, so you're not going to get weird looks from people by carrying them. But one of my biggest things is in the money book, You're a Badass at Making Money. She really talks about breaking down your belief systems and your thought processes when you are dealing with money, and the fact that we need to reframe our thought processes in relation to money. And it's so interesting. And one of the big things in You Are a Badass, she makes a lot of lists in there, and the last item on every single list is love yourself, which is such a huge ordeal that I don't think most people grasp the concept of. And in You Are a Badass at Making Money, she constantly puts in different mantras that are great, different like affirmations for people to utilize to kind of reframe their idea of money and dealing with the fact that money is just a thing, but if you had a relationship with it, what does that relationship actually look like, and who's really putting into this relationship, kind of thing. So definitely something to check out. Definitely something that is great to have on hand. Just get ready for a very casual conversation. So, and ironically, 3 of the 5 books are published by Penguin Putnam. So, interesting. But yeah. So those are some of the self-help memoirs, nonfiction books that I've been reading lately. If you've got suggestions of ones to check out, leave them in the comments. I would love to see what you guys have been reading and why you suggest them. So I will see y'all in the next episode. Have a great day.